Okay, well, I've loaded up a couple of pallets in the back of my truck. And there they are in the shop. And the project, we're going to build a simple box, as this is right at the very beginning of woodworking to me. I built dozens of these boxes. Let's get into this. Let's talk about these tools that we're going to use to put this box together. This has an adjustable fence. So this saw has preset detents, which I like. This is stainless steel, super hard. So it's on other saws, they are plastic. This is stainless steel. The adjustments for this, in case it needs to be recalibrated, they're nice and big and beefy. This comes with its own little tool to pull the blade, make adjustments. I want you to think about this. If you hold this down flat and you hold it tight against that fence and you're sure that this isn't going to move back and forth and it's stable, when you cut that, now you're probably worried about where that piece is going to end up, and that's all right. But if you're on this side of that blade is like your shield. That piece is going to have a really hard time coming around and hitting you. You're fine. You're on this side. And this piece was never going to come around here and hit you. There is the end of the saw. There's the business trough. That's where the blade always is going to end up. So keep your hands out of the yellow. I found that right here, that's where my hand normally lays. The center of my hand is normally at the center of, right at that line where this action takes place. So as long as you're there, you're well away from this. There's nothing backing up this point to the end of that. And that's when pieces can fly maybe a little bit. Let's cut that off and see if we can make that thing fly. Again, I'm at no risk of that piece coming out and hitting me. Let's see if we can make it fly. Well, can't even try to make it fly. The back side of this fence is to prevent this from going that way. Oh, absolutely, we could cut the fence off. Look at that. That sucker is on there. So that's why this moves to the side. For this application, we're just building a box. We're just going to make some 45-degree cuts to make a couple of picture frames. So this is I call it a preset detent. There's something underneath here that engages with these slots. Those are the preset detent. Listen to this. It locks in perfectly at 45 degrees. You're like, what kind of blade do I need? You know, this is a 12-inch blade. And it says general purpose right here. It says the size right here. And it tells you everything that you need to know on this blade. You know, you might not realize that how the blade works. You can put this blade on backwards, absolutely, and that'll be a problem. You'll know it really quick because it'll just burn that wood. It'll try to cut it, but it's trying to cut it in reverse. But let me see if I can explain how this works so you understand it. There's the tooth. That's the business right there. And the tooth is a little bit wider than the field of this blade. When that tooth is running into your workpiece, time after time after time, it's pushing this in that direction. And the reason why your workpiece doesn't move backwards with it is because it's stopped by this fence. Now, if you're going to want to try to keep this off the fence to cut some weird angle, don't be surprised if this thing starts cutting it and then it binds up and then the saw is going to fly forward. Are you in danger? No, it's not that big of a deal. This is going to kind of tumble around a little bit and it's going to be a little off-putting, but you're not going to cut your arm off. one hand's up here on the trigger, the other hand's down here trying to control this piece that maybe you have not placed properly, but you're not going to hurt yourself. Just make sure you have a good blade on there. That's pretty much all you need to know about the chop saw. I always make sure that I have a push stick. I make these. They all say save on them because people throw them away. They think they're scrap wood on the job site sometimes. Like, what is that? Scrap wood. So this one's cherry. So that's my hardwood. It's really thin. So when I'm cutting, just thin material, I want to make sure it's a hardwood so it doesn't break when I don't want it to break. This one's poplar. I just made this with a jigsaw, and I've made 100 of these things, I bet. And you just make sure that is 90 degrees. They're all pretty much the same. So 90 degrees. I just need a little lip down here to catch my material as I push it through. And I like having like a little grip on here. Now this one here, I didn't put the little wavy grip in here because I didn't want it to decrease the strength of the piece. Now at some point something happened here. I might be in trouble for that. So I got a thicker one too. I probably just made this on the fly because I couldn't find, this is my favorite one. One thing about this little DeWalt table saw is look what they have here. A push stick, always at the ready. Look at that. It's a lot like the ones that I make, and it just fits in there. It's lightweight, and it never seems to wander off. It's always where I need it. One thing I'm just used to my short push sticks that I make. There's nothing wrong with this one. I've had a little hard time getting used to this. Just because it's just a little bit, it's a little further away than I like to be. I kind of like to be up here, hold my hand so I have more control over this and my workpiece that I'm cutting. But I've been using this more and more often as I get used to it. Notice that this riving knife, the center of this, is dead center of that blade. Okay, why? I gotta tell you, every table saw I've ever bought, I took that riving knife and threw it out. But it's important. And the reason why it's important is because when you're cutting a piece of wood and you go through there, I don't want to turn this on yet. As you're cutting through there, you're removing parts of that wood, the structure of it and the integrity of it. So it can do an action like this and separate from itself, but it can actually pinch in on itself. Excuse me. If it pinches in on itself, it's going to pinch the blade. And then that's going to happen after the cutting portion of the blade does its business. It goes through and it pinches the blade. When it pinches the blade back here, the direction of that blade is coming up at that point. So it's going to lift your workpiece up and then throw it forward into you. Okay, that's what the riving knife is for. The material is going to pinch. It's going to pinch right here. Well, that's fine. This won't allow it to pinch on the blade. How cool is that? All right. The other thing, the other purpose of that I've noticed is sometimes when you're running a particular workpiece through the blade and you make your pass and you come through, if for some reason your hand is at a special angle or something and your workpiece wants to kick back at you, that's going to guard your hand from getting in the danger zone. That's never happened to me, but I imagine that could play a part in safety. So go ahead and keep that on. Understand how it comes out in case you want to get to the point where you're going to do a plunge cut. You may never get into that, so you may never have to worry about it. Just understand how that comes out. Don't throw it away. Keep it on there. It's not a needless doohickey. There's an actual good purpose for it. We have a DeWalt jigsaw, and you know what? It's become my favorite. I really like this. I was told, my daughter told me, Dad, this is actually hers. I bought this for her. I said, she's in college and she's taking some classes where you got to make some stuff. And she goes, I don't even really know how does the blade work? All right. Well, this is an up-cutting blade because the teeth are pointing up, just like that. You'll always, 99% of the time, you'll want an up-cutting blade. They do have down-cutting blades, and that's when you're cutting some material where you don't want any tear out. But generally speaking, this does a nice clean job. There's adjustments when you want to do some fine cutting, and where you want to cut into some 2x4s. It's a more aggressive cut. It cuts faster. To take that blade in and out, this little thumb tab right here. Let's see if I can get all this in here. You pull this thumb tab right here, and that actuates a blade receiver and locker here. This is I'm trying to think of the name. It's like a T. Is it a Model T? I suppose you could put this. Let's try to put this blade in backwards, like wrong reading. Let's put it up here into this little slot, and lo and behold, you can put that in backwards. And but that's a bad thing, because that blade, let's see if we can hone in here, is going to ride on this set of wheels here, and that's going to track the blade. So you wouldn't want to put that in backwards. You want, look at how easy that is. DeWalt, you guys, you're showing off. You were always capable of putting out good tools, but you haven't until recently, I think. All right, so the back of this blade rides on that wheel right there, and that's on a bearing. That wheel spins and allows that blade to go up and down and cut. Another feature of this is this little lever. You turn that out, and you can change the bevel if you want to just bevel something real quick and then lock it back in place. This is actually a pretty darn good saw. It's got a blower. Their intent is to blow the dust out of your way so you can see what you're cutting. The case is the right size. It fits in there. I think most people, they come to work for me and they put tools away, and they have the hardest time understanding where this fits. It's not exactly self-explanatory. I guess you could put it in there backwards. You would think that the blade would go on this side. It doesn't. That's where all the cord goes. Another thing I like about this case, normally I don't keep tools in cases. I think tool manufacturers get a kick out of, I think it's pretty fraudulent. When you use their cases, this cord, it's too tight. They'll have the side of this toolbox right up against there, and it wrecks the cord. And once the cord's done, they're betting that you'll just buy a new tool. They didn't do that here. There's room for the cord. It's a good rigid case. I've broken a lot of tool cases over the years, but this is a good one. I don't use a circular saw that often in what I do. I'm not a house framer, and but this is definitely part of my toolkit. I do use this more and more often. Technically, I actually had, I worked on a framing crew one time, and I had a circular saw, a corded one. This was 30 plus years ago. I actually had a circular saw come out of my workpiece, and the blade was climbing, it got into my pant leg and it was climbing my leg. I was not injured, but I tell you what, it scared me. I'll never forget that. And, you know, once you come that close to an injury like that, you want to learn some things. In that minute, the guy I was working for, he just started scolding me, man. He let me have it. And what I was doing wrong is I'm left-handed. I'm very left-handed. And the one thing that he taught me instantly, he yelled this to me, is you want the blade, you want the motor in the body of the saw between you and the blade. So the motor between you and the blade. That's how you want to hold it. So technically this is a left-handed saw. Most cordless saws that I see out there are left-handed. Why? No idea. Most corded circ saws are right-handed. This is on the other side of the motor. So and you know what? When I first started out using circular saws, I tried to limit that because I was really afraid of them, to be honest with you. It seemed like they would bind up in a 2x4 really quick and easy, and then it would climb out. Well, there's a couple of reasons for that. One, I was holding it wrong, I believe, but I was used to holding it in my right hand. So now, if I go to grab somebody else's circular saw, it could be right-handed, left-handed. It really doesn't matter to me. It's one of the only things that I'm ambidextrous with. But if the blade is dull, then it's going to grab a hold of the wood easier and climb its way back out of the workpiece. All right, since we're talking about that, look at the direction of the teeth, okay? This is going to spin in this direction, okay? And notice the teeth and what they're doing. There's the business edge of the tooth, and when it spins this way, it's pushing the material up against this. It can't go any further. I'm not sure how to explain that any better than that, unless we go over to the bandsaw. Let's go. All right. So this is not the best bandsaw in the world, but you understand what's happening here. See the light? That's why I always have a flashlight on me. All right. Let's get a good view of this, if we can. All right. See the direction of the teeth? They're pushing down into where the wood will be, and the wood can't go anywhere because it's backed up by this fence. It can't go any further than that. So understand the direction of the teeth here. This is a good example. All right, in my video, I used my circular saw to cut up that pallet, those 2 pallets, and I had some trouble with it, and so most of it I cut with a circular saw. If you just wanted to use a jigsaw, it's going to go a lot smoother, a little bit slower, but it's going to work out better for you. So these are our victims. This is in my garage here. It's my garage shop. It's an at-home cabinet shop. And I'm just going to, you know, I used to do these right on the ground. And I think in this case, I wish I would have, or at least on a workbench. I was just trying to get into this video. You know, in this shop here, there was actually a time where a buddy of mine and we built a 25-foot castle bed. It was a castle-themed bedroom for a little girl named Gracie. And we finished it in this little garage as well. So you don't need a gigantic building to fabricate stuff. You can just use a small shop. About 30 years ago, this is where I started. I didn't build much out of wood before I built these boxes, and dozens of them. The magic number that you're looking for is 17 1/4. And in between the structural components of a pallet There's like about 18 inches typically, like a standard pallet, I guess. And so the idea is you're going to cut in between those stringers. Yeah, let's call them stringers. And you could, you would think that you just pull the nails out, but they're spiral nails. You can pull them out, but you're going to wreck the pieces, so you got to cut them out. And so I'm just putting down some little marks so I can, little guidelines. And I'm going to adjust the depth of my saw just so it doesn't get away from me. When I was talking about tools, I'm going to show you a couple of times where I had a little hard time. See, there's one. The fence, the little guide, the guard, it's a guard, kind of kept getting in the way. And it's a little clumsy. This is why a jigsaw might be the best club to go putting with. And as I was putting this together, I was little things were kind of seeping back into my memory. I'm like, oh yeah, that's right. That's why you don't always want to use a circular saw for this, because as those boards will fall, they'll get kind of bound up. So I'm like, yeah, maybe I'll break out the jigsaw, but I'm going to try this. See if I can make it bind up. That was my thought. That's why I brought the jigsaw out, and I thought, well, maybe I'll demonstrate how the circular saw is going to get bound up on this wood. And it just wasn't happening. It did on the first ones. So I put the camera right on my little harness I wrap around my neck, and I kind of started getting used to just cutting it. And so it was going fairly decent, actually. So, you take the pieces and just stack them up, in a pile, and so they're not in your way. I think here pretty soon, I'm going to get the saw to bind up. I was actually trying to get it to happen. So sometimes when only one nail is holding it, the piece will twist out of the way. I think there it goes. And sometimes it'll bind up and the saw gets all kind of, grumpy. So this piece came right out. I just pulled it off, the nails. It was just a punky piece there, but I was actually having a fairly easy time of doing this with a circular saw. But here in a minute, I know, because I actually filmed this, I did all this. I'm going to switch over to the jigsaw here pretty soon. I was really eager to try to demonstrate the saw binding up and having kind of a hard time, and I did there a little bit. But you'll notice I have the body of the saw in between me and the blade. All right, let's try this jigsaw out. While you're using the jigsaw, there's not a whole lot that's going to go wrong here. You know what I did? I started cutting that one, and I thought, you know what? I'm going to keep that one there, and I'm going to skip it and cut the other ones. That way, when I get down to the end, it's not like trying to fall away from me and causing some trouble. It's going to sit there. I can grab a hold of it with the other hand, and so I can actually... The joy of using the jigsaw here is I had one hand on the saw and the other hand on the pallet. With the circular saw, I always kept having to hold that guard, excuse me, the blade guard out of the way. So it was kind of a two-hand operation. But with a jigsaw, I just had one hand holding the pallet, the other one holding the jigsaw, and life is easy. It was actually, with a jigsaw, it was actually a little bit easier to get closer to the stringer than it was with a circular saw. One thing I always struggle with, I probably always will, is when I'm cutting with a circular saw, finding that line. You gotta be in the right position. just see where the blade and the line are in alignment with the jigsaw. I've always found it a little bit easier. So that's almost 18 inches. And my goal on everything, and this is a measurement I'm going to throw out a lot. See how I have all my panels kind of laid out? I want to make sure that I have enough, if I'm making a square that's 6 sides, and I'm just kind of going through and making sure they're the same thickness. But I'm laying everything out, and it looks like I'm going to need to get into the second pallet. All the pieces that were there on my outfeed table, that was from one pallet. I mean, it was a heck of a lot of material there. So the third pallet here was mostly hardwood. And so with a hardwood, those pieces are thinner. With a softwood, since it's not as strong, they'll make them a little bit thicker. So I'm going to just push that other hardwood pallet off to the side, and this second pallet that I'm going to use, the thickness was just more favorable and similar. So I'm going to just get that guy out of the way. That'll become, that's destined for a bonfire. I might just take it back to where I got it from, because I know somebody paid money for it. So, I went driving around, and I went in this industrial area knowing that there's going to be somebody that's got some pallets. And, 30 years ago, when I first started making these, I would just drive around and grab them. But now that I'm old and responsible, I kind of felt like I should ask permission. So I found this company. It was like a online auction company, and they had just a huge surplus of pallets. I mean, just stacks of them. But I looked up the company, and I emailed the owner, and I just told him I got a little project, and if he doesn't mind, I'd like to steal a couple of his pallets. And he emailed me back about a week later and said, yeah, come on, take as many as you want. I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm getting back in the box business. The whole point of building this box is, hey, if you got an apartment and you don't have the money for furniture, I tell you what, they end up being about the right height for a coffee table, a nightstand, an end table. If you don't like the rustic look of that, just throw a doily over it. You can put stuff in it. I went to an art exhibit recently, and this young lady had a bunch of photographs and just art pieces you can kind of go through, almost like an album collection. And I thought this would actually be a pretty cool piece to prop up a piece of artwork, or store your pictures in, photo albums, whatever you want. What we're trying to do is build a simple box. The material is free. It doesn't take a tremendous amount of skill. You don't have to have a huge, investment in equipment. There's like 4 or 5 tools. And I'd be willing to bet you could borrow these tools. But the important thing is the lessons you learn from building a simple box. When you get done, you get done building this, like most arts and crafts projects, carpentry projects. It's one thing I love about my end of the industry is you have a really good sense of accomplishment. And this is a great place to start. This is where I started. 30 years ago, I didn't really create anything out of wood before I built this type of box. And then I built the second box, and the second box was a little bit better. And the third box, eventually I got to the point where I just couldn't build a box that had a flat top. It had to have a radius top, like a roll top trunk. And then they had to have handles. And then they had to have hinges. And they had to be lined with panels that were upholstered. Then they had to have trays. Then they had to be lined in aromatic cedar. And, I made one actually for my old man as a gift. Probably my 4th or 5th or 10th box. And it had a roll top, and everything was, nice and flush and sanded. I stained it, and I put a couple of coats of polyurethane. I took a chunk of wood and I carved out our family crest, put that on the front. I put some handles on it. And, I think he ended up putting, just a bunch of prints and rolled up and it just kept the lid open. And it became kind of like a piece of furniture, but with function. When I'm using this chop box, you can stack up a couple pieces, several pieces right on top of one another, keep them all in line, and make sure they're nice and, flat against the platform, tight against the back fence, and cut them all at once. And then I take one of these pieces and I write the letter P on it, and P stands for pattern. And I just use that as a, that way I don't have to, I just use that as a gauge. Whenever you do that, always use the same one. That way, because they can change in size. You don't want to make a pattern and then push it off to the side, make another piece. I was trying to select what size nails I want. I ended up with 2-inch nails and 1 1/4 nails. So now, this is where it starts getting fun. We're going to make basically two picture frames, and that becomes the foundation or the backbone of this box. Use a little tight bond glue, do a little kind of like a pre-assemble, get everything in line where you want them, select your pieces, make sure you want, the rough edges where you want the rough edges. I wanted to see more rough edges than I wanted to see cleanly cut edges. So I stick them all together, that way the glue doesn't get all over the place. And then I start nailing them. Now, this first frame, I'm going to nail them wrong. The way I'm holding that nail gun is not how I normally do this. On the second frame, I'm going to demonstrate how I normally hold the nail gun. And I use my workbench as as kind of a guide. I'll hold the frame almost to the edge of my workbench. When I'm calling the outfeed table and my table saw the workbench, I always end up working here. And I have a nice size workbench. I rest the bottom of the nail gun where the nail comes out onto the workbench. And so long as that's resting right there, I know exactly where that nail is going to end up. It's just slightly above the bottom. So I know it's going to end up in the top. You just have to worry about, making sure you're at the correct angle. You don't want to nail your workpiece to your workbench. So see how it's resting right there on the workbench? So there's some consistency there that just kind of helps you. That way you're not, repositioning 1,000 times. It saves time and headaches. So I'm going to take that adjustable fence, loosen it up, and take it to the end of all my pieces. Make sure they're flush, and cut them all at once. Bada boom, bada bing. This is easy. So now they're all flush on both sides. And you know what? If one or two are a little off, not a big deal. The magic number here is 17 1/4. I remember that from 30 years ago, and it came into play during this entire build. Now, what you're going to do is you're going to take one of those pieces and you're just going to connect one picture frame to the next and just keep stacking them. You're going to do the side, then the bottom, and then the other side. We'll do the top last. After the side, the two sides and the bottom are clad with these 17 1/4 pieces. Then we're going to clad from the inside the two picture frames. You don't want anything to be longer than 17 1/4. If it's a little shorter, it's not the end of the world. I would say you want to be the most accurate with your picture frames. Now here I'm demonstrating little something with where the nails are going to come out. Now, if I'm resting the tail end of my nail gun on my finger, the nail will come out just straight down. But if I pull my finger out and I shoot that nail and I'm hugging the inside of where that nail is going to go so it doesn't pop out of the outside of the box, that's all right. But if I hold it towards the outside edge, I'm definitely going to see that nail, because that nail is going to come out at a slight angle. So keep that in mind. Just holding your finger under there, holding your finger under the tail end of the nail gun is going to be helpful. In case you have a hard time with nails kind of wandering after you shoot them in, you don't want to see them pop out the side or the face of whatever you're nailing into. So I go ahead and I just keep nailing along. One thing I try to practice is I'll run them straight in, the nails, but I'll try to run a couple at an angle, opposing each other. If they're just straight in, then they can come straight out. But if you have a couple that are opposing each other at a slight angle, there's a little more strength there. So this is where you start finding imperfections in the material itself. We're not dimensioning any of this on the joiner, then the planer, and then the table saw, making it geometrically correct, perfect. So you're going to have to deal with some stuff that's out of square. It's not dead flat. And you'll use a clamp. As you start building this box, you'll have to force it into square. Oh, look at that. Come on, dude. You gotta run all the nails and all the pieces. Jeez, oh Pete, what an idiot. It's just funny. It's just gonna happen. That clamp is in the way and I'm just nailing. I'm thinking I'm done. While you're doing this, every little bit, every little task, in the back of your head, what should be happening is you're thinking of what step would be next. Not so much that you get confused or out of focus, but plan it out. Take your time, do a good job, and plan it out. All right, see how that thing's not tracking right? It's tracking a little off. So I'm going to pull it together. I use the pieces themselves because they're all pretty well at 17 1/4. And like I said, if one or two is a little bit off, a little bit shorter, it can't be longer. Otherwise, what I'm doing right now is going to be really difficult. If they're a little shorter, what I'm doing now helps out a lot. And when I say a little bit shorter, I'm talking like a 1/16 or an 1/8 of an inch. They could be in this part, they could be 1/2 inch off because there's plenty of nailing surface in the backside of that frame. So I'm going to make sure that my nails, as I nail through those boards that are facing up into the frame, make sure I'm not nailing into my workbench. And I know 100% that they weren't going to go through, but it's still good to kind of double check. Because I didn't measure every single board, the thickness. That one's a little cattywampus, right? It just came off, and I saved that for later because I know that I'm going to cut that off. The rest of them were relatively straight. I mean, this thing's not a bucket. It certainly isn't watertight, but I didn't want like a 1/2 inch void in there. See how crooked that was? So I lined it with the end of the box, made a mark. It's the last piece of that course of 17 1/4 rips, pallet pieces. What are we going to call those? Let's call them pallet pieces. So here I had a little wandering nail. It didn't go where I wanted to. Just grab the end of it and swing it back and forth, and it'll actually break off below flush. You don't have to break out the channel locks and the bar and the hammer. Just grab the end of it and wiggle it just a little bit. So I'm nailing the crap out of it. I'm running several nails, and again, a lot of them were at a slight angle. That way they're kind of opposing. So I'm building a box here, man. So if I find some imperfections like that, I come up with a little plan where I want to hide that imperfection. It's gone. It's hidden. Nobody knows. Well, at this point, everyone knows it's there. But you won't see it. So we're going to stack these in here. I got super lucky there that not one of those had to be ripped on the table saw, which is pretty cool. We have a standing box. Right there is where you're going to want to put some handles on your next box. You can lift this up right off the ground. Just grab the frame. You don't have to have a handle. But eventually you're going to want, after you've created this, you're going to want to test yourself, challenge yourself, and see if you can make it even better box. Such a cool box. It's turning out nice and clean. I'm pretty happy. I'm going to just kind of, the first thing you're going to see here is the top of the box. This is going to fall in that direction, but it's the perfect length in this direction. So the first thing you're going to see is the top of the box. Choose wisely. I don't know what he's looking at. Yeah. It can only be the right size in one direction because one side is clad flush and the other side is clad over the frame. So hand select some decent pieces that you want to see. They lay down flat. They look aesthetically pleasing. Unless you're going to cover it with a towel or a piece of artwork, then it really doesn't matter. But it's just a good practice. This is where I kind of slow down and think things out a little bit because I'm just about done. Get rid of that piece because it's not long enough anyway. It's not wide enough. I'll put this piece on here. Make sure it's flush at the other end. And I'm just going to cut off the excess. Take my pencil, mark it a couple times. So this, I'm going to demonstrate something here. I'm going to cut it to size, and it's going to be oversized compared to the line that I just drew. I'm going to move my fence out of the way, and I'm going to freehand this because it's off by that much. It's fine on that side, but I'm going to freehand this. And is that possible with a table saw? Are you risking life and injury? No, just keep your hands out of the way. Take your time. Do a good job. It's a good practice. Since the line is there, leave the line. Cut up to the line, but don't cut away any of the line. That way, if you have to make some adjustments, maybe you're going to sand it off, maybe file it off, whatever. But if you take away the line, you don't know how bad you screwed up. So leave the line. So when I put that piece on there, I left the rough side out as much as possible, as many pieces as possible, because I wanted the whole thing to look rough and pretty consistent. So I'm just kind of picking out my mending plates. That's what we'll call them. And I'm going to try to determine how much space, because those mending plates have got to fit in within the very top parameter. Perimeter? One of the two. So I'm just making a mark, and I'm leaving myself a little bit of wiggle room, but not too much, because I don't want it to be sloppy, too sloppy. I want it to be, when it's set in place, I want it to be pretty tight. So when I nail this, I'm gonna run through some nails. I make sure I, line everything up nice and flush with the next piece, and then I'm gonna run some nails at opposing angles. So I set this lid back on, and I know it's gonna be tight. Pretty sure it should fit, and it does. That's too tight. I don't want to have to think about how I get the lid on. And if I wanted to put a hinge on there, there's no hinge in the world that's going to make that hinge in there properly. So what I'm doing is I'm taking the jigsaw and I'm going to chamfer the edge. I'm just going to, make it a little easier to fit in. And it does. It's slightly easier, but you got to do all 4 sides. And so you just tilt the bed of the jigsaw slightly, and you go around all 4 sides, and you just chamfer it. Take your time. You know, I've been dealing with a jigsaw for a while, so my control is pretty good. But just take your time, run a nice clean line, and then it fits in there just perfectly. This is our box. This isn't, you know, maybe a Kanawasuji joint, you know, but you get to that point in accuracy. Defects start to pop out to you a little quicker and earlier. And this particular project it's a practice and layout. It's a Japanese joinery. It's really cool. I saw this in a book, and I tried it out on a piece of mahogany, and it turned out pretty cool. But this is the box that we made, and it's a good practice. I think anyone could pull this off with cheap materials, couple of tools, a little workspace, and you know, when you get all done with this, it's something you can be proud of, and it inspires you to take your skills to the next level and see what's possible from there. Good luck.